a sprawling piece of land nestled between rolling hills and thick patches of woods. It was once a thriving homestead, renowned for its bountiful crops of corn, pumpkins, and sunflowers. Generations of Millers had worked the land, proud of their family's legacy, but the farm's glory days were long behind it. Now, as Barrow Creek experienced a population boom, with new developments springing up and the town expanding its borders, more and more eyes were turning toward the Miller Farm, and not just because of its aging barns or fertile soil. No, what caught the attention of passers-by was the peculiar scarecrow that had stood in the same spot for as long as anyone could remember. Its tattered clothing flapped in the wind, its burlap face weathered and stitched with dark, uneven threads. But what truly set it apart were its eyes, buttons sewn into the burlap that seemed to follow you wherever you went. Townsfolk whispered about it, claiming the scarecrow was more than just an old family relic. Some said it moved when no one was looking. Others swore it watched them as they passed by. No one dared linger too long near it, especially after sunset. The Miller family had always been a subject of gossip, but lately, the stories had taken on a darker tone. With the town's recent growth, new residents were keen to explore the outskirts, and curious developers had begun sniffing around the old farmland, eyeing it as prime real estate for future projects. The Millers, however, were fiercely protective of their land, and despite their dwindling numbers and declining farm operations, they refused to sell. The Millers had been among the founding families of Barrow Creek. The farm, established in the early 1870s, was initially a small plot of land with a single barn and a modest farmhouse. Over the decades, it grew into one of the largest properties in the area, with acres of cornfields and an orchard that stretched as far as the eye could see. The Miller family prospered through hard work, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to the land. However, as the 20th century rolled on, the family's fortunes began to wane. By the 1990s, only a few members of the Miller family remained. The most recent patriarch, Harold Miller, ran the farm with his wife, Susan, but after Harold's unexpected death in a farming accident, the farm slowly fell into disrepair. Susan, left to manage the vast property alone, did her best to keep the family business alive, but the crops began to fail, and fewer people came to buy from their once busy roadside stand. Now, the farm was run by their two children, Ethan and Clara Miller. Ethan, in his early 40s, had stayed on the farm his entire life, working the land as best he could despite the family's financial troubles. Clara, the younger of the two, had left Barrow Creek after college, but returned when their mother passed away 5 years ago. Together, they tried to keep the farm afloat, but the looming pressure from developers and the strange happenings around the scarecrow made life difficult. The scarecrow, Ethan claimed, had been on the farm for as long as he could remember. His father, Harold, had always been vague about where it came from. It had been there when Harold was a boy, and his own father, before him, had told similar stories. The scarecrow had always been part of Miller Farm, always standing watch over the crops, year after year, never needing to be replaced. The scarecrow was dressed in ragged clothes, a long coat and trousers that had faded from black to a dull gray. Its face was sewn together with burlap, but the stitches were crude, as if done in haste. The buttons that served as eyes were unnerving, appearing almost lifelike in the way they gleamed in the sunlight. What made it stranger still was the way the scarecrow seemed untouched by time. The coat, though torn in places, never truly wore out. The burlap face never rotted, and the buttons never dulled. The Miller family had always been uneasy about the scarecrow, but they kept it out of tradition. Harold had once told Ethan that the scarecrow was part of what kept the farm's soil fertile, though he never explained how. And Harold's father had said something similar to him. The scarecrow was like a guardian, a silent sentinel that watched over the crops and ensured they grew. But over the years, people began to wonder if there was more to it than just folklore. Barrow Creek, once a sleepy town known for its old-world charm and friendly locals, had been experiencing a boom in population for the last decade. People from neighboring cities flocked to the area for its new suburban developments, and young professionals seeking a quieter life were buying up property at an alarming rate. With new restaurants, boutiques, and modern amenities, the town had transformed into a bustling hub of activity. For the Millers, this growth brought a new wave of interest in their farm. Developers offered them substantial sums to sell their land, but Ethan and Clara always refused. "It's our family's land," Ethan would say, "and we're not giving it up for anything." Clara, though, was more conflicted. She loved the farm, but she also saw the practical side of things. The farm wasn't making much money, and they were barely scraping by. Still, she stood by Ethan's decision, not wanting to betray their family's legacy. But the town's newcomers, especially the developers, didn't take kindly to being turned away. They began to spread rumors, whispers that Miller Farm wasn't just an old, failing homestead, but a place touched by something darker. The Scarecrow, once an oddity, became the center of these stories. Some said it was cursed, that it moved when no one was looking, and that the Miller family had made some kind of pact with it to protect their land. The whispers only grew louder when strange occurrences began happening near the farm. Over the past year, Barrow Creek had seen a rise in missing pets and unexplained disappearances, particularly around the area near Miller Farm. People began to talk, and the Scarecrow became the focus of the rumors. Some said it was alive, that it lured animals and people to their doom. Others whispered that the Miller family was using it to keep their land fertile, offering sacrifices in exchange for prosperity. Ethan and Clara ignored the gossip, but even they couldn't deny that something felt off. One evening, Clara caught sight of something strange while walking through the fields. As the sun set behind the hills, she swore she saw the Scarecrow shift slightly, its button eyes gleaming in the fading light. She blinked, and it was still again, but the unease in her chest remained. Then, there were the dreams. Ethan had been plagued by nightmares for months. In them, the Scarecrow would leave its post in the field and wander through the farm, its movements slow and deliberate, as if it were looking for something, or someone. In his dreams, the Scarecrow always stopped at the foot of his bed, its button eyes staring down at him, unblinking. He would wake up drenched in sweat, but the feeling of being watched lingered long after. Ethan didn't tell Clara about the dreams at first, but when Clara mentioned her own strange experiences, the whispers in the fields, the feeling of being watched, he couldn't keep it to himself anymore. "I think it's connected to the farm," Ethan said one night, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. "Dad always said the Scarecrow was important, that it kept the land fertile. But what if it's more than that? What if it's keeping something out, or keeping something in?" Determined to find answers, Clara began researching the history of the farm. She combed through old records at the town's library, looking for anything that could explain the Scarecrow's presence. What she found unsettled her. The Miller farm, it seemed, had always been different. From the very beginning, there had been whispers about strange happenings, unusually large crops, peculiar weather patterns, and, most troubling of all, disappearances. People who had worked on the farm over the years had gone missing, their bodies never found. And each time, the Scarecrow had been there, standing watch. One of the oldest records she uncovered was from the late 1800s, a journal kept by a local preacher who had visited the farm. In his writings, he spoke of a pact made by the original Miller, William Miller, with something dark, something that required a sacrifice. The preacher had warned William that the land was cursed, but William, desperate to see his farm flourish, had ignored him. According to the journal, the Scarecrow had been placed in the field soon after the pact was made, and from that moment on, the land thrived, but at a terrible cost. Clara's heart raced as she read the final passage in the journal. The Scarecrow is not a mere guardian of the field. It is a vessel, a prison for the darkness that hungers beneath the soil. As long as it stands, the farm will prosper. But should it fall? Clara rushed back to the farm, desperate to confront Ethan with what she had learned. But when she arrived, she found the fields empty. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the land, and in the distance, she could see the Scarecrow, standing tall in the middle of the cornfield. Something about it seemed different, though. Its posture more rigid, its presence more menacing. "Ethan!" Clara called, running toward the house, but there was no answer. As she neared the Scarecrow, the whispers began. They were faint at first, just like in the stories she had heard, but they grew louder with every step. The wind picked up, carrying the voices with it, swirling around her like a cyclone. "We're still here," the voices hissed. "We never left." Clara froze, her heart pounding. She turned slowly to face the Scarecrow, and as she did, she realized with a sickening feeling that it was no longer just a scarecrow. The burlap face was gone, replaced by something far more human, a face she recognized. It was Ethan.